Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Tejas Rao, and welcome to this session, Leveraging National Legal Frameworks for Just Transition, hosted by the World Bank, United Nations Environment Programme, and United Nations Development Programme at the Climate Law and Governance Day 2025. Thank you for joining us. I will hand over the floor to Advocate Remi Moncel, Senior Counsel at the World Bank, as the chair of this session. Remi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tejas. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. My name is Remi Moncel. I'm a senior counsel at the World Bank. In the legal department, we have a specialized unit called LEGEN, which focuses on environmental and international law. And it's in this capacity that I'm chairing today's event focused on leveraging national legal frameworks for just transition. We will together explore how countries can translate just transition principles into enforceable legal norms. And I'm also very pleased to use this opportunity to launch a new report that offers some guidance on this issue. And this report is jointly published by the World Bank and the UN Development Programme, UNDP, with colleagues connected here on the call. This event is jointly convened with the Environmental Justice Working Group, which is an initiative of the Global Forum on Law, Justice, and Development. The co-chairs of that initiative are the World Bank, UNDP, and the UN Environment Programme, UNEP. And UNEP is also represented on the panel today. Tejas, you might be able to put in the chats a link to our Environmental Justice Working Group for those who want to learn more. I'd like to thank the UNDP team, UNEP, as well as the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who is joining us today on the panel. Also like to thank the organizers of Climate Law and Governance Day for all the work putting the program together today, as well as for the opportunity for us to discuss this important topic. So a little bit about the structure for our session today. We will have about 1 hour where we're going to present this new report, as well as have a broader discussion on the relevance of legal frameworks for just transition with our panelists. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. Because these are difficult questions and we have varied perspectives globally on these questions, I invite all of you to ask questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom platform. As we go along, we might be able to address them in real time, or we'll come to them at the end. Please note that the event is recorded for those who are not able to watch it live. So I am pleased to introduce, to begin, our panelists. I'm really delighted all of them to be here with us. It's really a great lineup. We have joining us today Hwang, who serves as the legal officer at the UN Environment Programme, where she focuses on advancing and implementing environmental rule of law and environmental rights. And prior to joining UNEP, she worked with the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, addressing economic, social, and environmental issues. I'm giving only brief bios. I hope my panelists will indulge me, just in the interest of time. They're all illustrious representatives with storied careers, and maybe Tejas, you can put the more detailed bios in the chat also for those who want to learn more. We are also joined by María Eugenia de Paola, who's the program coordinator for the UN Development Programme in Argentina, a role she has held since March 2023. And previously, she was the coordinator of Environment and Sustainable Development at UNDP Argentina. We are also joined by Sanja Kapetina, who is head of department, secondary energy and projects at the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Relations of Bosnia and Herzegovina. As the head of department within the ministry's energy sector, she has been actively involved in the development and implementation of key national strategic documents aimed at reforming the energy and climate sectors in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We're also joined by Rubinos, who serves as counsel in the Environment and International Law Practice Group, and LEGEN here at the World Bank, my colleague. And in this role, she supports World Bank member countries in their efforts to strengthen climate change and natural resources law and governance. She's also one of the authors of the report we'll discuss today. I'd also like to acknowledge the co-authors of the report who are also connected here today, Tejas Rao, who's also our online moderator, and a LEGEN fellow here at the World Bank, as well as Sean O'Connell, Roman Meyer, Max van den Bosch, and Yijia Li, who are connected. And we're also joined by several other colleagues from UNEP and UNDP, I'm pleased to welcome and acknowledge here, including Florencia Nocera and Matthias Novik. Thank you so much for being with us. So we have a great lineup. And welcome to all of you, and thank you again so much. What I propose to do is spend a little bit of time in the first few minutes discussing the just transition report that we're launching, and then we'll have a discussion altogether about what we can take away from it and how these concepts of just transition apply in practice. But to start, I would like to invite everyone here who's on the screen or in the room in the audience to reflect on what just transition means. And so if you could take a few moments and use the chat function in Zoom to maybe pick one word or two words to describe just transition. What does just transition mean to you? And it's not a trick question, but it'll reveal, I think, some interesting perspectives on this concept of just transition, which is not so straightforward, I think, for any of us. Are you all able to use the chat function? Just making sure. Can everybody use the chat? Yes, I can see some answers coming in. So to repeat, we are inviting comments in the chat function from all the audience members. In a word or two, what does just transition mean to you? Just begin our conversation. See some mentions of inclusion, mentions of equity, equitable contributions, focus on process, equitable process. I see a focus on local and international people, so people-centered approaches. Focus on stakeholder engagement at the local level, global level, development, leaving no one behind. Yes, green jobs. So thank you. And please keep the answers coming in. This is, I think, a telling and a useful exercise for us to go through because just transition, I think, touches on many of these dimensions. And interestingly, there is not a unified, single, accepted international definition of just transition. And I think that's part of the point, is that is a multifaceted concept that's difficult to grasp. And all the dimensions are important. So maybe just for purposes, of the presentation today, just for those who maybe are a bit less familiar with just transition, I might be able to provide just a working definition tentatively. And I would suggest that it's a process of social inclusion to move towards a low carbon, climate resilient economy in a way that leaves no one behind and that equitably shares in the benefits of the new economy. But I think as we can see from the answers in the chat, and as I've mentioned, concepts of just transition are varied. What we can say is that the origins of just transition are in the labor movement, and that there are different understandings of the word, just. So we saw many principles mentioned in the chat. There are a few others that our report talks about, including the idea of people-centered approaches, the transition that is socially protective, that emphasizes social dialogue, that is human rights based, that is equitable and fair, that is gender responsive, that takes a whole of the economy or whole of society approach. And those are just a few examples. So we also know that this concept of just transition, although it has been around for some time, it really gained significant prominence in recent years, particularly in 2015, with a reference in the preamble to the Paris Agreement, as well as the adoption of ILO guidelines on just transition. Since then, I think it's fair to say it's gained even more steam and more recognition, and is now, just as one example of that prominence, reflected in about half of the recent rounds of nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. So I think an apt observations at COP30 to be thinking about the importance of just transition in the NDCs themselves. So here is a brief overview of the report that we're very pleased to launch today. As mentioned, this is a collaboration between the World Bank team and the UNDP team under the auspices of the Environmental Justice Working Group. And the contents are the following. We provide first an overview of the international legal foundations of just transition, the main international conventions. I'll go into more detail in just a moment. We then provide a bit of a survey of examples of national level approaches for developing regulatory frameworks that move from these broad principles that we were discussing into national law. And we do that across key sectors. And then finally, we try to make this report actionable by offering some recommendations for policymakers and development institutions who work with national governments, as well as civil society, to try to strengthen national legal frameworks for development. So the first piece is the International Legal Foundations for Just Transition. And so here we have a focus on four main areas of international law. It's not meant to be an exclusive survey, but it is meant to provide a snapshot of some of the main international conventions and decisions. Of course, climate change is a feature of this chapter, including the Paris Agreement and implementing decisions. International labor rights is a major piece of the just transition landscape, and we discuss the ILO conventions and ILO guidelines, among other developments. We discuss international human rights law in many different dimensions, including, for example, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Aarhus Convention, the Escazú Agreement, and then a number of soft law instruments and initiatives, including the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and on critical energy transition minerals. We have a discussion on natural resources law, including the Convention on Biological Diversity and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We then pivot to discussion of national level approaches. And here again, we're not purporting to be comprehensive, but we did try to think about what might be some of the key sectors in which just transition is relevant. And so we've identified the importance of national standards, national labor standards, the importance of the energy sector, and we give examples of regulatory approaches at the national level in a range of countries globally. We do have a focus on critical minerals that are going to be essential for the transition to a low carbon climate resilient economy and the use of renewable energy. And then, of course, very apt for COP30, a discussion of agriculture, forestry, and natural resources. We then also discuss the importance of legal frameworks for financing of the just transition and legal frameworks for dispute resolution related to the just transition. So here we give examples of financial instruments in the public and private sector that have been used, as well as the governing laws that can help promote just transition. And we give examples of international disputes that might arise in the context of just transition policies. For example, the claims that foreign investors might make against national governments who seek to enact just transition policies. And so we provide a bit of a snapshot of that debate and some key considerations for crafting national policies in a way that would seek to minimize or avoid investor-state disputes. And then we recognize that just transition policies and laws can be the basis of claims supporting or opposing just transition policies at the national level. And so that's also discussed here. I'm going over this very quickly. We'll share with you in a moment a link to the full report. But we conclude with some recommendations for enhancing national frameworks for just transition. I'm going through these very quickly. We'll hear more about it in just a moment on the panel. But essentially, we suggest that following examples from the report and assessing what laws are applicable at the national and international level, countries can follow an approach to strengthen frameworks that starts with a mapping exercise of relevant laws, an assessment of possible approaches they'd like to adopt, a coordination exercise across different levels of government and different sectors, a strengthening of those national legal frameworks, and finally, implementation. This is a link to the full report, and I'm inviting also Tejas to put the link in the chat. We'll hear more about the details of this report, I'm sure, in our conversation. You'll have some time after the event to go through it in more detail. So this is a very brief, very summary overview of the report. I'm not really doing it justice, but I want to make sure we have enough time in this event to focus on a discussion more broadly about just transition and national legal frameworks, how they work, how they can be developed, how they can support the implementation of these broad just transition principles. So I'd now like to use most of our time to have that discussion with our panel. And we have, as I mentioned in the introductions, a really great mix of representation from international organizations as well as national governments to really think through how we do this in practice. So if I may, I'm going to start by inviting Sanja Kapetina from the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina to share some remarks with us. So Sanja, here we are. I am here sitting at the World Bank, sharing these perspectives of a report that we co-wrote with UNDP. But then you're doing this in practice, right? You're the actual maker of just transition. And so we would love to hear from you about the frontline local perspective that you have on what it takes to move from international commitments and national policy goals around just transition to legal implementation at the national level. So please feel free to share with us what your country has done, some of the examples of challenges you might be facing in coordinating across ministries, energy, labor, environment, finance, for example, while managing the competing interests of industry, labor, communities. So the floor is the floor is yours, and we welcome your perspective on your country's experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the invitation. It's really my pleasure and honor to be here today and to have possibility to discuss on such important topic, something that is definitely top priority in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Just transition is a process. We are working for, I think, for several years now on this. And I would really like to take this opportunity to thank to the World Bank that provide us significant support in this process, to UNDP also. And yes, you are right, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, this process of transposing international obligations into concrete legal norms is always complex, as it takes place in the country with multiple levels of government. We have state level, entity level institutions, cantonal level, municipal level. So we have divided competencies. But I think that this very experience actually demonstrates why institutional architecture is crucial for managing just transition. We have, let's say, several turning points that shape this process. And one of the most important one is, as you already mentioned, definitely fulfillment of our international commitments. And that was our main guiding force, let's say this way, because for many years we have operated with a clear framework of international commitments. I would here highlight Energy Community Treaty, but also Paris Agreement and Sofia Declaration on Green Agenda for Western Balkan, because we have quite clear commitments what we need to do, how to define our 2030 energy and climate targets with a final goal to reach our carbon neutrality up to 2050. And when we started with this process, we understood how just transition is important for Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially having in mind that in our country, 2/3 of our electricity is produced coal, in mind that we have 20,000 people that are working in coal mining sector. That is huge number if we consider that in Bosnia we have a little more than 3 million of people. So we decide that actually coal will be our transitional fuel in order to have enough time for this just transition, in order to be sure that we will not leave anyone behind in this process. And then with the support from the World Bank, we start off with the process of development of the roadmap for just transition for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And it was a great first step. We recognized that really we need to more connect different sectors that were not traditionally working together in order to make proper decisions. So energy, environment, climate, labor, social protection, finance, development. So it was very long work. We learned a lot. And actually, but lesson that we learned that no single sector can lead this process. So we need to have some kind of hybrid governance model. And the sex actually of whole transition depends on well-designed and effective national legal frameworks and institutions that balance economic transformation with social and environmental protection. Of course, we still a lot of challenges that are in mind in this process, and I believe that panels like this, communication is very important in order to exchange knowledge, best practices from the other countries that are more development. For us, one of the main challenges is definitely this fragmented competence within our country, then strong resistance from industry, but also fear among workers, particularly in mining communities where trust in institutions is not in adequate level, I would say. A lack of dedicated financing instruments is definitely something that is challenged. Limited institutional capacity to design these complex cross-sectoral policies, and insufficient public communications. World Bank helped us and did some survey that shows that nearly 80% of citizens at that time were not aware of the concept of just transition, and that's something that we really need to work on. So what we did, we have regular coordination meeting. We try to have this early involvement of local communities, through cooperation with all our domestic and international partners in order to send this clear message that this transition is not about shutting down coal, but opening a really new space for new jobs, new investment, and modernization of regions built around the coal. So the main conclusion, and I will stop with this, from our experience is that transition is hard, demanding process, but possible only if our institutions are strengthened in parallel, if trust is built, and if our targets are realistic, and definitely financially supported from both international and domestic institutions. And I think that we are on a good way. I hope that I answered your question.
It did. Thank you so much, Sanja. If I may, just ask a quick follow-up question. I'm curious to hear more because you talked about how important the coal sector is for your government and your country, and the emphasis you're trying to bring on transitioning also in a way that is mindful of workers and creating opportunity for them. Maybe it'd be useful for you to say a few words about that, what the opportunity elements are, and how you have approached that. Maybe a minute or two.
I apologize, I didn't hear you quite well. I'm not sure our other participants have this problem with connection. Just can you repeat? Sorry.
Yes, sure. I was inviting you
clear.
to. We can hear you clearly. If others are having issues hearing me, please let me know. I was inviting you to share a few words about the opportunity element that you described for the coal sector and coal workers. How do you build opportunity for a sector like coal and the workers who are affected by the transition?
Yeah. Reuse of land, repurpose, retraining of the workers. We have like coal mining municipalities, when we based on specifics of every municipality and their potential, prepared in this roadmap a clear pathway. How can they go through this process of just transition? For example, for land, when you use biomass, so biomass plant, solar PV, something small, hydropower plants, so that is like reuse of land. Then retraining, what we was thinking, because I mentioned this energy and climate targets. Energy efficiency is something that we really are working on. So retraining of these workers to help us in this issue. So there are a lot of recommendations that are given this roadmap, and we are really hoping that it will be adopted soon, and that we will be able to continue with this process. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sanja, for those practical perspectives. Those are great to hear, and we hear about the opportunities, we hear about the challenges, we hear about the need for coordination and inclusion, not just of affected people, but also across the different ministries who have different areas of responsibility. So thank you for sharing those perspectives. María, Eugenia, Paola, thank you again for being with us. I might turn to you now. You're based in Argentina with the Office of UNDP, and you work on just transition also with member countries, at the local level. So building maybe on what the experience that Sanja shared, you could share your own experience in working with countries, maybe giving examples of some of the gaps or barriers that you have observed in countries' attempt to translate transition principles into national legal systems, whether that's under the Paris Agreement or the International Labor Organization conventions or human rights frameworks. What are some experiences from Argentina, from the region that you can share? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Remi, and thank you for this invitation. This is a very important discussion on just transition, and particularly as it relates to lithium extraction in Argentina. I am pleased to share insights from our work at UNDP Country Office. And thank you, Sean and Roman, for your inputs about our global work. And thank you, Florencia and Matías, for your inputs about our national work. To answer your question, Remi, there are two main gaps that I want to stand up. The first gap is how fragmented efforts are to support just transition processes. So we need integrated approaches. UNDP works globally across a number of streams in support of just transition processes, including, among others, energy, finance, livelihoods, mining and extraction, rule of law, corporate regulation, human rights, and environmental protection. At the global level, a UNDP Just Transition Coordination Group identifies opportunities for integration across streams so partners at the national level can be better supported. And we do this very actively in Argentina, working across governance, human development, and environment teams. The second gap is that we need to consider commitments and obligations from governments and different sectors, and to use these rules to raise the bar across all areas of the just transition, but particularly for the rights of vulnerable groups, including their participation. So UNDP is committed to a rules and rights-based just transition, and we are guided, for example, by our globally environmental justice strategy from 2022. And now with this report done together with the World Bank, we will be able to guide even more just transition processes in being rules and rights-based. And in this context, I will share with you the work of the country office of the UNDP in Argentina regarding critical minerals for the energy transition as a dimension, a very important dimension of the just transition. Argentina stands at the forefront of the global energy transition with a lithium reserve in the so-called lithium triangle that we share with Bolivia and Chile. And for the last 5 years at UNDP Argentina, we have focused our efforts on building capacity among stakeholders, strengthening regulatory frameworks and fostering multi-sectoral dialogue. And a key pillar of our approach, you mentioned it before, is the implementation of the Escazú Agreement, which guarantees access to environmental information, public participation, and access to justice in environmental matters. We see the Escazú Agreement as a vital instrument for the rule of law and environmental governance in Latin America and the Caribbean, and we actively promote its principles. At the national level, Argentina's constitution and the legal framework recognize the right to a healthy environment, as well as the rights considered in Escazú. Nevertheless, this agreement provides a strong foundation and raises the bar for strengthening environmental protection. And our work aims to support dialogues together with governments, indigenous communities, the academia, and the private sector to address tensions and encourage constructive collaboration. In this context, last year, we launched the third tri-national meeting, political dialogue and knowledge exchange on public policies in the a lithium triangle between the different actors involved in lithium mining. The public sector at the national and subnational level, because we are a federal country, different parts of the national government and the subnational government, the environmental, mining, water resources, and indigenous areas, the academia, private sector, civil society, and the meeting was attended by 100 participants from different countries that included from Latin America, not only Argentina, but also Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. There are a few main conclusions that from the dialogue that I would like to share with you, specifically 3 conclusions. One is that public participation was recognized for identifying and preventing impacts. Also, the necessity of ensuring fair access to benefits, especially from indigenous communities. Another key conclusion was the concern about water. In response to that, the importance of considering ecosystem services and adopted an integrated approach to watershed management was highlighted. Additionally, emphasis was placed on the value of planning tools, environmental impact assessment, strategic environmental assessment, and participatory environmental monitoring. In this regard, the possibility of creating a regional action plan for lithium management with a sustainable approach was mentioned. Another relevant tool that I want to highlight is the use of a foresight exercise. This tool showed that in order to achieve future scenarios, participatory and good scenarios, participatory and inclusive governance focused on transparency is required. In addition, an important activity is the specific work that we develop with local communities, strengthening their capacities to participate in the different participatory process. From UNDP Argentina, we support the creation of spaces to share experiences, tools and methodologies, and developing common regional agendas to tackle shared challenges. It is important to recognize, and once for all, that such issues transcend national borders, and therefore solutions must be collective. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share Argentinians' experience, and I look forward to learning from other panelists and continuing this important dialogue on just transition.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was a great perspective to share. Really appreciated the regional dimensions you brought in through the Escazú agreement. It's a nice complementary, I think, to Sanja's presentation on more of the European perspective. So thank you. I think now it would be useful to turn it over to Soo-Young Hwang from the UN Environment Program, legal officer there. Thank you so much, Soo-Young, for being with us. So you've heard the perspective of 2, national governments or country representatives for UNDP working at the national and regional level. But you have a global perspective as the UN Environment Program. You've been working, of course, on these issues of international environmental law as well as environmental rule of law for some time, and helping embed just transition frameworks in national law and international law, moving from maybe traditional environmental regulation towards more integrated approaches towards social, economic and dimensions of environmental law. So what is the perspective that you would like to share on the role of environmental rule of law in the design, the facilitation, and the promotion of just transition?
Okay, thank you so much, Remi, and also for organizing all this meeting. And I really also appreciated the 2 panelists' presentation before. And then I also got a bit, comforted that, okay, we're actually working towards the same goal and we agree on a lot of principles. We talked about inclusion, participation, and how complex a just transition is. But there's a way to actually get through this and get it right. So thanks, Remi. So from on the role of environmental rule of law in just transition. So just quickly to briefly mention about those, like for those who are not familiar with the concept of environmental rule of law, there's a very quick answer to that for this short presentation. You could see environmental rule of law as a rule of law in the environmental context. So we try to bring legal, social, economic, and human dimensions to the environmental issues, like by breaking the silos and by taking a whole of society approach to this. So UNEP has been working on the intersection between the environmental rule of law and as well as just transition. And we have a forthcoming report to be published next year. So what we have found out from this report is a relationship, first of all, the relationship between environmental rule of law and just transition. And very nicely, we found actually the core elements of environmental rule of law and just transition, they significantly overlap and they're mutually reinforcing. And there are many positive roles of using the environmental rule of law framework and as a tool to get the just transition right for the benefit of everybody and also for the planet. So the environmental rule of law has a positive role both on the process and also the outcome of just transition. So from designing where we want to go and to facilitating how we want to get there and to the outcome, like to achieve a just transition that is just and equitable for everybody and also for the environment. So environmental rule of law serves both as a catalyst and as a framework for achieving just transition, as it emphasizes, as many of Remi and María and also Sanja mentioned, it emphasizes like accountability, transparency, participatory governance, and environmental rule law provides the legal foundation to ensure that environmental and social safeguards are upheld. And we also talked about like how like complex just transition is. An environmental rule of law framework can help manage the complexity of just transition by accounting for the interconnections between environmental systems, human rights, and socioeconomic factors. So it can also guide balancing the diverse interests of many different stakeholders and also help navigate urgent timelines and support coordination across institutional and sectoral divides. So in short, the framing just transition as a rule of law or environmental rule of law issue addresses deeper concerns around governance, legitimacy, and integrity, especially in the era of environmental and climate emergency. That said, achieving just transition demands a coordinated, integrated application of environmental rule of law. And I would like to introduce 7 key environmental rule of law elements that will help to making just transition work for everybody. So these elements are interlinked and codependent. So number 1, we need a fair, clear, and implementable just transition laws and policies. But laws and policies are not enough. And number 2, and how do we get there is number 2. We need access to information, public participation, and access to justice in just transition processes. And who is going to make this work? And as number 3 is accountability and integrity of institutions and decision makers, including just transition finance. So we also need the institutions and decision makers to be able to be accountable and also hold integrities. And number 4, clear and coordinated mandates and roles across and within institutions. We have seen a lot of overlapping mandates and confusion around the work and capacities of institutions, but we need also the institutions to have clear mandates, but also the roles in addressing just transition. Number 5, accessible, fair, impartial, timely, and responsive dispute resolution mechanisms. So when something goes wrong, what do? We will need a mechanism that works on a basis accessible, fair, impartial, timely, and responsive mechanism. And number 6, a lot of our panelists talk about the importance of human rights and environmental rights. So number 6, we need recognition and protection of environmental rights. And lastly, we also need 7 just transition strategies adapted and contextualized to national realities. We believe that one size doesn't fit for all, so we need to be contextual. We need to contextualize the strategies and also in the implementation side of the just transition. So environmental rule of law not only provides a needed legal frameworks, but we strongly believe it enables conditions that make just transition possible. And the UNEP is very happy to be part of this working group on environmental justice together with the UNDP and World Bank, and we are ready to support the states and all the other stakeholders in getting the just transition right for the people and the planet. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sanja, for that perspective on environmental rule of law. It is a complementary concept, and we can see how central it is also to just transition, as you've outlined for these critical elements. We look forward to the report, more reading for our audience, so get ready. And I'd like to conclude this first round by inviting my colleague Dave Rubinos, who's a counsel at the World Bank, to share some perspectives on some of the practical recommendations that the report contains that's being launched today on how to systematically strengthen national legal frameworks for just transition. So Dave, over to you if you can share some of the steps that the report recommends in this respect.
Thank you, Remi. Very honored and pleased to speak here today. As Remi mentioned, the Legal Foundations for Just Transitions report that we're launching today proposes a MACSI roadmap, and that's spelled MACSI, which stands for Mapping, Assessment, Coordination, Strengthening, and Implementation. When a country intends to effectively integrate just transition principles into their national legal frameworks, this MACSI roadmap can help guide it in a structured and sequential manner. First is mapping. Here, the questions would include, is the country a member of relevant intergovernmental organizations, like the UN, the World Bank, etc.? Second, what are the country's needs and priorities? What do the progressive 5-year NDCs state? Their mid-century long-term strategies or their national climate, energy, or development plans say? What are its resources? For example, does it have coal mines or does it import? Does it have coal plants? And to what renewable energy resource is it planning to shift to? Is it solar or wind? Another question here is, what are the relevant existing national and international legal frameworks already in place? Has it, for example, ratified relevant treaties like the Paris Agreement, the ILO conventions, the access conventions that the other panelists referred to, like the Aarhus and Escazú agreements? How about other multilateral agreements and bilateral agreements as well? Has the country referenced soft law instruments like the 2015 ILO guidelines on just transition? Does it have generic or special laws, including sectoral laws? And has it captured just transition principles, even if they're not explicitly labeled as just transition in their existing legal frameworks? And as mentioned by some of the panelists, these principles, which we've culled from various literature and listed in the report, include people-centered, socially protective, human rights-based, inclusive of all stakeholders, equitable, fair, gender responsive, beneficial, whole of economy, whole of society. It's also important to ask what judicial decisions have been issued on relevant issues. Then we go to assessment. Here the questions include, based on the information gathered so far, is there alignment across national and international legal frameworks? What's missing? What gap-filling measures are needed? Is a framework legislation covering all sectors and different dimensions needed? Are reforms needed? And this step ends with planning of integration of just transition into the national legal framework. Then we go to C, coordination. This entails developing coherent national legal frameworks through laws and institutions. And this must happen across sectors, across levels and branches of government, vertically and horizontally, including identifying lead agencies. And this must also happen across laws, whether existing or proposed, constitutional, legislative, regulatory, policy, and whether national or subnational. Then letter S for strengthening. This goes further than ensuring that laws are in place to ensuring that they are robust enough to ensure efficient and effective outcomes. So this entails actually ratifying relevant treaties, actually amending or revising laws, ensuring enforcement capacity, and following and participating in developments in different fora to inform national decision-making. As just transition is still being articulated and shaped in different discussions by different stakeholders. Lastly, letter I, implementation. This entails enforcing laws through governmental coordination and adequate resources, and having periodic review mechanisms for monitoring and evaluation, and ensuring adaptive management and compliance. And in all these cases, the national legal frameworks must consider the country context, must have in place access to information, stakeholder input and participation, including to capture local knowledge, grievance mechanisms, training for judges, legislators, policymakers, and those who support them, capacity building of communities and civil society, especially community-based organizations, and support for directly or indirectly affected stakeholders, and targeted support, especially for those who are most affected, such as the vulnerable. So that's the MACSI roadmap. Again, MACSI, mapping, assessment, coordination, strengthening, and implementation. It's discussed in Chapter 4 of the Legal Foundations for Just Transitions report. We're going with the MACSI roadmap, but if you have another suggestion for how we should phrase this in a memorable way, please do suggest. That's it, Remi, and over to you.
Thank you, Day. Thanks for this overview of the recommendations. Maybe a couple things that jump out from what you said and connecting to what we also heard from our other panelists. So one is, if you want to learn more about this, on page 138 of the report itself. So you have that in the chat. You can go read the details. That was a good overview by Day, but there's more there. Second is, I heard some echoes to what Sanja was talking about earlier, right? You were talking about the process that you followed in your country, and there were some elements of commonality there. And this reminds me that this framework that they presented is a general guide. It's not, very prescriptive, because each situation is so different from country to country. The priorities are different, the national contexts are different, the legal systems and practices are different. But if you think of it in terms of steps as they did, then hopefully that is helpful to at least have a framework to think through these issues. So I'm going to ask a few more questions of our panelists before we open it up, but I want to invite everyone to share their perspective. If you'd like to put some questions in the Q&A about your experience or questions you have, I'm pleased to share we have about 300 participants connected. Some of them are joining together in one classroom or group in one connection here. So thank you so much for joining, and all of you for being here from around the world. We look forward to your questions. So I think now it would be useful to turn to Sanja and today. Maybe I can ask both of you, how how we can work together. I think we heard each other talk about our respective approaches and work on just transition, but now let's talk about how we work together. So Sanja and maybe starting with Sanja, development institutions like the World Bank, like UNDP, like UNEP and many others, bilateral agencies also, offer some frameworks and technical support for just transition legal reforms, as well as some financing. Maybe you could talk about, Sanja, your experience working with development institutions, how that has worked for you, what critical enabling conditions are necessary for collaboration to be fruitful, what forms of support development institutions can provide that's helpful to you in your country, in Bosnia Herzegovina or elsewhere, you think, so we can learn from your experience.
Thank you once again. Again, very, very important process question. As I already mentioned, I see this as a process, and we are really learning by doing. And so far, we were lucky to have really great support from various international institutions. But I think really it's needed. We heard several times that this is a very complex process, that integrated approach is needed, that one of the first steps is development of just transition strategy, then to have adequate legal regulatory framework. And it's great to have guidelines, but we really need tailor-made specific technical assistance for Bosnia and Herzegovina. For example, we have various regulations, EU regulations that EU countries directly applying. We cannot apply it. We firstly need to transpose that. And they are cross-sectoral, they are quite complex. So we really need approach for Bosnia and Herzegovina based on our specific needs. So we do not need some kind of general or European model. We really need model that is fit for Bosnia and Herzegovina. In this process, in order to define the right pathway, we really need to see what is the best scenario for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And again, it is not only about energy, about finding a proper mix, what will replace coal, what type of renewable energy source, or what kind of energy efficiency measures. So we really need support in this development of right scenarios, of analysis what would be the best technologies for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Of course, socioeconomic analyses are very much needed to see what all these activities will have impact, let's say, on our workers and our communities. Also, although we commit ourselves that we will be in line with EU targets, that we will do our best to achieve carbon neutrality up to 2050, we are not have the same starting point as EU countries. So we are not as developed, we do not have access to the same funds, same grants. So this is also something where really we would need additional support in, for example, grants for preparing plan studies, investment funds for all type of renewables, financing for social programs, for reskilling that I already mentioned, for mobility support, definitely for vulnerable groups, instruments for mainland repurposing, and of course, support for local budgets actually in these coal mine areas. What is also needed is to strengthen our institutional administrative capacities. I think that in most of the countries, situation is the same. We really face serious lack of human capacities, and we really need to work in parallel on these quite complex and demanding processes. Support for social dialogue based on experience for various international financial institutions and donors is something that is very much needed. We did have support in this, and hopefully we will have it in future. And maybe what is also very important to be stressed, that we really need long-term support, long-term programming, let's say, instead of short-term projects, because this is a process and as such it takes time. So we really needs this continuity in support in order to be ready to achieve these very, very ambitious targets. And I'll repeat again myself, we really see that this just transition is not only environmental policy or climate policy or energy policy. It can be, and it is, development policy, because if we go in the right way through this process, we will at the end have a new green jobs, we will have modern infrastructure, we will have clean air, better GDP, we will have be positioned to repurpose our mining land, for example, for solar parks, new industrial zones. So this is really a great development chance. And in order to achieve it, we really need to use this integrated approach, combine all these different sectors, and of course, to have adequate investments in this. And this is where we really need investments. I hope that I answered on your question and that I didn't take much time.
No, not at all. Thank you so much. No, it's really useful. We really value your practical perspective on what you need, what has worked, what remains a challenge. That informs our work, through this report and other initiatives like it. We try to be responsive to country needs. So it's very important that we hear from you and others, including those who are connected in the audience. Dave, maybe you want to say a few words about what the report highlights by way of examples of other development institution offerings. And then I'll also invite Sean, maybe, and anybody else from the UNDP team who's connected to share your experience on the kind of support that development institutions can provide. Over to you, Dave, first, and then Sean.
Thank you, Remi. The role of development institutions is also discussed in Chapter 4, along with the MAXI roadmap. There, we discuss that development institutions have a role to play in supporting countries in the development and implementation of their national legal frameworks as their respective mandates allow. These institutions include intergovernmental organizations focused on economic and social development, like the UN agencies, the multilateral development banks, like the World Bank, bilateral development agencies, and other development actors. And this role has gained more prominence and urgency with the adoption of the Glasgow Climate Pact, which explicitly reference in climate finance the role of MDBs and other intergovernmental institutions. Individual MDBs, in particular, have addressed and referenced just transition in their corporate climate change, environmental and social safeguards, energy or just transition specific strategies, plans, policies, and programs. And jointly, almost every year during the COP season, since 2018, these MDBs have been issuing declarations, statements, principles, and methodologies on just transition. And these touch on working with national financial institutions to develop financing strategies, support such as for transition plans, and the LTS that I mentioned earlier, the long-term strategies, and other types of financing. These MDBs include ADB, AIB, AFTB, CB, EBRD, EIB, IDB, NDB, the World Bank Group. And of course, within the UN system, the UNSG has established a high-level panel on critical energy minerals. There's the UNEP and UNDP work that our other panelists have elaborated on. And the types of support cover a suite of options. These include loans, grants, guarantees, technical assistance, analytics, and sometimes they can all be deployed at the same time. And just to respond to Sanja's example in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which the World Bank has been partnering for 30 years. We have a just coal transition project with them. And it has used analytics for a roadmap on just transition. And there's a grant, there's a loan for closure of a coal mine, a transition to renewable energy, specifically solar, and support for affected laborers and the broad community impacted. And there's one specific element, technical assistance support for regulatory updates on just transition, specifically on labor and social support for the unemployed and laid off people in mining areas. So that's just one example. This project was approved in the summer, and we're looking forward to its implementation and sharing the results in the near future. Over to you, Remi.
Thank you, Dag, and thanks for making the connection to Sanja's remarks and the World Bank's work in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So yeah, a panoply of possible options, also many things to still learn as development institutions, and the report is a starting point. Let me turn over to Sean Roman. Is there anything you'd like to add from the UNDP perspective in terms of your experience working with member countries strengthening national frameworks?
I thank you, Remi. Thank you very much. I mean, maybe if you can speak for a few seconds and maybe ask Maru to come back in briefly just on Argentina. The only thing I would add from the global perspective of UNDP, and also in an effort to answer some of the really excellent questions in the chat, is around, where do we start? So there's questions around how do we get a climate change law in, or which laws are the most important, or where do we begin? For us as UNDP, and I think for the World Bank as well, we typically, when we start, we get requests for support. We have to sit down and make sure everyone is participating in discussions around the just transition processes. In each country, it could look very different. If there is a large dependency on coal mining or on lithium extraction, that could be the predominant problem, and you need those people who are affected by those problems around the table. In other countries, mining is not the issue. It could be about renewable energy generation itself, building of dams, building of solar power plants, or whatever it might be. So for us, the real role for us, before we sit down, we have to look at who's at the table. We try to make sure as many people get at the table. One of the questions very helpfully from Joan is, where do you begin? You begin by bringing those people around the table, and you also begin, as Maru mentioned, making sure they have all the information they need to have a seat at the table and to be informed. And from then is really when we start to guide these just transition processes and really guide them by mapping all these obligations. So if you are trying to guide a process and transitioning a community away from coal mining, what are your obligations in doing that to the workers, to the environment, to other communities? So, and maybe if we have a few seconds, Maru from UNDP Argentina might add to that. But thank you very much, Remi. And that's where we would start as UNDP.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And maybe if I can ask Maru, as part of your answer, to elaborate on Sean's point, sharing the UNDP perspective, but also sharing how you integrate all these different dimensions of just transition, the social, the environment, the human rights. How do we build an integrated approach to just transition? Your thoughts are welcome on that.
Well, as John mentioned, we need everyone in the table, and also we need to work a lot with the different, not only with the national government, but also with the different levels government, especially, for example, in Argentina, we are a federal country. So you need the different sectors, you need public participation processes, but also coordination between and among the different levels of government.
Thank you so much. I think maybe Soo Young, I don't know if you want to add anything on this point, because you also have some perspectives perhaps to share from your report and your broader work on this integration question. Just transition is not a siloed issue, it's multifaceted, multi-sectoral, and we heard also multi-jurisdictional from Maru just now. So what are some insights that you might be able to share on how to take an integrated approach to just transition and environmental rule of law?
Yeah, Remi, I'll try to be short, but I want to just like strongly echo what others have said about the participation and like having access to information, access to justice. So I've seen all the questions as well. Like they talk about like how do we make it work? How can how can we make sure that the finance is working? But that's I think environmental rule of law principles. So once it's translated, including access to justice and access to participation and information and transparency and accountability. And that can really, really help in making sure that there's the laws working and institutions are empowered and held accountable. And there's also human dimensions that people participate. And I think one thing I wanted to mention about the legal design, like how do you like design it? I think it's all about process as well as outcomes, but process really has to be inclusive and participatory. By doing that, like involving people, involving different like government bodies, like provincial, federal, or the municipal, I think that you'll really be able to identify what is a priority and how we can also set a timeline, what is a more urgent issue and what can happen as a long-term issue and where we're going and what we want to achieve. So I think inclusive participatory process itself can really help to make justice work, and also effective institutions, as I mentioned, that the laws and policies are not enough, but we would really need different institutions, but having a clear mandate and the rules. And also like lastly, access to justice, accountability is really, really an important issue. When things go wrong, people should be able to access, to rectify the situation or bring justice into the situation. So I'll stop here, but I just want to also mention about these silos, about like how we are talking about like just transition. We have to have a a perspective into this. We do have a really great examples how the world is at the global policy level work broke the silo. So it's actually started with long time ago, but with the Paris Principle. So human rights has always been the relationship between human rights and climate has been now everybody recognize it, but it was a work of many, many years. But also it has been that the silo has been broken by like many key moments, but when the Paris Agreement really explicitly mentioned the rights-based approach and the human rights. So we see a lot of like dimensions of human rights getting into climate negotiations and climate commitments, and also to just transition. I think this we can learn also from this past experience that the silos can be broken, and all these principles of human rights or environmental rule of law or the legal principles can be translated into the policy and into the operationalization of just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Soo-young. Great additions. So we've had a great discussion so far, and I thank the panelists for their remarks. Thank you so much, as well as for trying to begin to answer some of the questions we've received in the chat. So we have many participants. I'd like to bring in some of the perspectives from the audience, and I'm going to ask Tejas Rao to come in and maybe summarize a few of the questions we've received, and then I'll invite our panelists to respond to one or more of the questions as they wish.
Thank you very much, Remi, and thank you very much to our panelists for such an engaging discussion that has attracted so many questions already. We have Yamikani Chuchanti from Malawi who asks what remedies or mechanisms can a developing country crippled by constant devaluation and underfunded institutions implement to improve their prospects of effectively implementing just transition framework. We then have a question from Joanne from St. Lucia, as well as Professor Marcus Gehring from the University of Cambridge, asking about how national climate finance laws can especially anchor just transition principles while also ensuring frontline communities, youth and women meaningfully shape these frameworks, while also ensuring that these laws do not perpetuate existing inequalities. And finally, we have a question from Muhammad Shees Nizamani from Pakistan, who asks, how can we deal with this situation where funds that are allocated for climate change and just transition issues are not necessarily used or allocated to that purpose? Thank you, Remi.
Thank you, Tejas. So I'm going to open it up in just a second. Apologies in advance if I'm a bit brisk with time towards the end. I've been told that our session will end abruptly at time, so we'll try to be brief in our responses. But maybe Tejas, thanks for reading the questions. Please feel free to answer as well, because you have co-authored this report more closely with us. I'm thinking especially of the question from Professor Gehring on financing laws and models, which we discuss a bit in the report. Would you like to say a word about that? And maybe then I'll open it up for anybody else who would like to answer any of the questions we've received so far.
Sure, thank you very much, Remi. I think for that question especially, I would guide everyone on this session to especially take a look at pages 111 to 115 of this report, where we've extensively discussed how climate finance laws can especially do this. But what we're starting to see, especially with some of the examples that we've discussed in the report, is that climate finance legislation are starting to earmark the way that process and participation can especially ensure that those who have historically been excluded are made a part of the process for how decisions are taken for climate projects. And we're starting to see that development institutions are also playing a role in making those community organization sessions as well as information sharing sessions happen. I think those are the two main things that come out, in addition to the existing literature as well as practices of environment and social impact assessments. So I would leave it there for the panelists to take up.
Thank you, Tejas. So maybe we can first ask Hwang, then María, then Sanja, then Day, and others if they would like to respond to any of these questions. And as you do so, please feel free also to share any concluding remarks that you have in general about our discussion.
Please, Hwang, after you.
Oh, thank you. I was like, so many great questions. I'm not sure if I can actually answer like all the questions, or even I can try to attempt it. But I think, and someone mentioned about actually the financing, and I think one of the really like the key issues that comes to our attention as we work with different stakeholders is track financing. Or especially for indigenous peoples, especially on the just transition issues and critical energy minerals issues. So I think that's one way to bring more transparency into the financing. Also, like yeah, it shouldn't just be yeah, like sharing also the access to finance is really an important issue, especially for the indigenous peoples. That they have been doing a lot of great work. Nobody will doubt that, and I think it's enabling them, continue to enabling them to do their work for the environment and for their human rights is really a key issue. So I think diversifying financing is as for indigenous peoples and also the communities and the all stakeholders, women, youth, and also those who are in marginalized situations is really a key to make the just transition work. So and I know we have limited time, so I will stop here. And I think the just transition is I think we really do have an opportunity. Like, you know, we've seen transitions, like we've seen many different types of transitions, and it's an imperative that we need to move away from fossil fuels and move to like greener future. And then we have an opportunity to make this right and make this more just and make this more fair for a lot of people who's been marginalized and who's suffered from the transformations that the world has gone through. So like I'm very happy to be to join this group and also be participated by like many others the participants who I believe that we have the same goal to make this work. So thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Hwang. Who would like to go next? María, maybe?
Okay, yes. I would like to mention on one hand regarding financing that it's important to work on tools in order to develop innovation related to financing. For example, in our office, we are working a lot on sustainable financing, financing and biodiversity, an initiative, global initiative of UNDP called BioFin. Well, we work a lot on analyzing the existing budgeting in order to support the biodiversity strategy, but also we work a lot identifying the gaps and on innovative solutions in order to fill these gaps. And one example of that is that we are working together with the insurance sector on an insurance for conservation of the jaguarete. That is a big cat here, a very important big cat. And this is, I'm sure this is not the only way, but it's important to complement the public flows of financing with this kind of innovative tools. And also we are working on inclusive insurance in order to consider the situation of floods here in Argentina. And we are working on a specific insurance with a parametric structure that will be launched next year. These are some examples of the ways that we can consider different sustainable finance tools, combining public and private sector efforts, and related also to just transition. And another point that I would like to share in order to close my intervention is that it's important to give value to the legal instruments that we have. At the beginning, Remi, you were speaking about the sources. And in the legal sources, we have the specific instruments, strategic assessments, impact assessments, participatory monitoring, and these are essential in order to make the just transition real. So I would like to conclude sharing with you that we are working a lot together with authorities, communities, in order to improve the implementation of the strategic tools, and also in order to improve the analysis of these tools, for example, regarding cumulative impacts in lithium extraction and in other activities. The cumulative impacts, for example, are considered in the Escazú Agreement, and also our national and subnational courts are ruling on this kind of impacts. And if you consider cumulative impacts, you will be able to consider an integrated environment for your decisions. No? Well, these are some examples. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, great. So I think I'm going to invite Sanja and Day maybe to offer concluding remarks in 1 minute or so each in response to the questions we've had, or any other points you'd like to raise before we close.
Thank you, and I will try to be fast because most of the things are already maybe just to add what kind of mechanisms can we develop in order to be sure that really all these funds for just transition were delivered to the workers and community. That was related to the last question that we received from a colleague from, I think that we should, develop some kind of transparent, measurable indicators, such as, employment outcomes, so number of new jobs that are created, quality of those jobs, success that we achieve in these reskilling programs. Then socioeconomic indicators like income levels, poverty rates, local economic diversification. Of course, environmental is also very important. So emission reduction, rehabilitation of mining areas, something that we are working with the World Bank. And what is, I think, also very much important is community level feedback to see what they think about this. Do they find these mechanisms do they have benefit from them? And of course, independent evaluation is always needed. I think that in that sense, we can have this, all circle closed. We have financial mechanisms and we have some way how to monitor them and to be sure that these funds are used in the best way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanja. Day, over to you.
Thank you, Remi. I'll go from the last to the first questions. Regarding Mohammed's question, this refers to accountability, and the World Bank and other MDBs and even the UN system has accountability mechanisms. These exist at 3 levels: the project level, the institutional level, and some also have independent grievance redress mechanisms. As a last resort or as a first resort, it varies per institution. These mechanisms do not replace the judicial mechanisms in place in countries. And we've included accountability in the list of just transition principles in the report. So that's something that we can rest assured that is part of a just transition framework. Regarding Professor Jering's question, you could include binding requirements through referencing treaties and other laws. If you have access to information laws or indigenous people's rights laws, you could incorporate that in the climate finance laws. You should also include institutions, establishment, and ensure they are resourced. Of course, drafting is important. Use shall instead of should or will to have binding effect. And referencing soft law instruments like the ILO guidelines would also be helpful. These could evolve later into customary international law. And lastly, we have to end according to Tejas. Yamikani, if there are foundational issues in the country, we have the country partnership framework and the country climate development reports prepared by the World Bank that could address these before going into the just transition specific support for countries. Thanks, Remi, over to you.
Thank you, Day. Thank you to all our panelists. I think it was a great discussion. I'm just going to try to close in the couple minutes we have left. A few key takeaways for me are, of course, the centrality of legal frameworks to operationalizing just transition, moving from principles and policy to commitments, enforceable norms, outcomes for sustainable development. We also heard a lot about the importance of the process itself as well as the outcomes. The participatory process that includes affected people, industries, and relevant ministries, and the importance of international conventions, frameworks, and partnerships in supporting countries and strengthening international legal frameworks. So you have the report in the chat, and the event will be posted on the Climate Law and Governance Initiative website. I'd like to thank our panelists, Sanja, María, Suyong, and Day, as well as our colleagues from UNDP, UNEP. Thank you so much for joining and for your remarks. It was an excellent session. Thank you to Tejas as well and the broader organizing team. Please enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you for joining us today and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.